Let's take attendance. Leighton. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Anybody? Okay, good. Leighton. No Leighton? Mark Arus.
Here.
David Burma. Tyler. Tyler's here. Sabrina.
Here.
Natalie.
Here.
Matthew.
Here.
Megan.
Here.
Jethro.
Here.
Ekaterina.
Here.
Miriam.
Here.
Tina.
Here.
Christina.
Here.
Ryan Hushiar.
Here.
Ryan Jalali. Ryan Jalali. Dina.
Here.
Sara.
Here.
Vincenzo.
Here.
Edward.
Here.
Hope.
Here.
Connor.
Here.
Edwin.
Here.
Panthea.
Here.
Kylie. There's Leighton. Leighton, you're here. Good.
Here.
Sorry, sir, I was getting water.
It's fine. Kylie, you here? Yep.
Yeah.
Jacob.
Here.
Vanya.
Here.
Did I miss anyone? Ryan Jalali's not here? All right. Who's going first, or not going first, but who's going today? Me.
Can I?
All right. Whenever you're ready,
Okay.
Natalie.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it?
Are you talking? Because I can't hear you.
Oh shoot.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, much better.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So, hello. Today I'll be covering the biases and methods the media uses when talking about the Hong Kong protest. To first have a better understanding of the information related to the situation, I will first be talking about the context of the protest. So basically, so there was a Hong Kong couple who traveled to Taiwan for vacation in 2018. Nearing the end of their vacation, there was a conflict between the boyfriend and the girlfriend, resulting. Is everything good? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a conflict between the boyfriend and the girlfriend, resulting to the death of the girlfriend. She was murdered by Chan Chong Kai, also known as Chan Tong Kai, the boyfriend, in February 17, 2018. The murder took place in Taiwan, and the man returned to Hong Kong, leaving the body in Taiwan. Now, fast forward to when the parents of Amber Poon, the girlfriend, begins to question where the disappearance of their daughter is. The police ultimately trace it back to Taiwan and find her body in a suitcase in the river. So this is when things start getting rather political. As you may or may not know, Hong Kong is a very specially governed location. Due to the agreement with Britain, basically Hong Kong citizens are available to more rights than those who are in mainland. They have a different law system and legal system. Right. After 1997, Britain returned Hong Kong back to China. So technically they're one country. But under the agreement that Hong Kong is allowed to have autonomy, meaning basically what I said previously, they have different laws and different legal systems compared to the mainland China. So the way to summarize this all is basically one country but two systems. And so Hong Kong people really enjoyed this system for a while until going back to the murder case. Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, which is the highest political power seat member person in Hong Kong, she proposed the extradition bill between Hong Kong, Taiwan, but this also includes mainland China. So the purpose of the extradition bill is basically if somebody from Hong Kong commits a crime and goes to Taiwan and like commits the crime there and then returns to Hong Kong, they can still get arrested. But in this case, because the extradition bill did not exist between the two countries, someone who commits a crime in Taiwan, for example, and returns back to their home country, they will not get arrested. And this is all fine and great, but the problem and the reason why the protest really erupted was because of the issue that Carrie Lam wanted to include mainland China as part of the deal in this exchange. And so then the protests began, and as many people of Hong Kong did not believe that China should be included in this extradition law, especially since the alleged reasoning behind the bill is that it is to arrest the man who committed the murder in Taiwan. So why is mainland China also included in there? So everything was originally peaceful. The protesters just marched the streets. They didn't really do any aggressive acts or anything, but the issue escalated as Carrie Lam refused to retract the bill, and she actually had no reactions to the protest, so she didn't make any statements. And then certain protesters began to act more violently, such as blocking major roads and burning garbage cans. So then, in response to that, the police was released, and they began using more violent means to stop the protesters, such as hitting them with batons, using tear gas, and shooting rubber bullets. And this became more of an issue because as more violence is used, there is no actual method of the government trying to ease the issues that the protesters are demanding for. And there was an incident where there was a suspect in a Chinese university, and police insisted on entering and arresting people, which is not allowed because you can't really just enter and be like, I'm going to arrest you now. But that's basically what they did. And then the protesters continued as this basically fueled their anger and more violence continued. And so then, just speeding things up, much later in the last 6 months, basically, there were many arrests, and the extradition law was suspended and ultimately withdrawn, which is originally what the people wanted. But at this point, when it was suspended, they were no longer satisfied with how the government responded to this situation, and they actually created 5 demands that they wanted to be completed by the government. And the first one was a no more extradition law, which was it was successful, it was done. But the remaining 4 was the protesters were not to be characterized as rioters, which is something that you will see later on in the Chinese news that I will show later. But basically, this is a big thing. It doesn't sound like a big thing because it's just a title, right? But rioters under the law are arrested, and they can have up to 10 years of getting imprisonment for being a rioter. And the third one is amnesty for arrested protesters. As I previously said, there was many arrests taken before this whole ordeal, and they wanted the protesters who were arrested to be released and removed of their charges. And it sounds kind of strange, but there's also something that you should note, that this whole protest was there was no one leader. It was just a bunch of people, and most of them were university, just really young people who were orchestrating this entire protest and organizing. And so these people, because they're so young, they're people who are thinking, wow, they're so young and they've been wrongfully, or maybe not wrongfully, it's just they were arrested and they're very, very young. So they want to be, basically that's the reasoning, one of the big reasons behind the third demand. The fourth demand is an independent inquiry about alleged police brutality. As I said before, the police responded very brutally and very aggressively towards the protesters. And while you can say that the protesters were also aggressive, and they were, there was wrong on both sides, basically. And they want an inquiry, basically, to talk about the police brutality that occurred during the protests, and implementation of complete universal suffrage. And the third one, but the final request is kind of complex, and it has relation to how Hong Kong is actually governed. As I said before, Hong Kong is has a really special governing system. So while they don't exactly follow everything of how mainland China works, they also have their own separate governing system. And so basically how the government in Hong Kong is elected is that there are a member committee, and from that 12,000 member committee, there are a bunch of them that are elected. But the thing is, the people who make up the member committee all have a special, they basically pledge loyalty to mainland China. And when you have the ability to vote for who you want to vote for, but everyone everyone you can choose to vote for is on a certain side, let's just say that, on a certain side, there's no purpose, no direct meaning, because in the end, you're basically voting for the same party. It's like there is, for example, a government, and they offer you 5 different options, but all 5 of them are from the same party. So there is no variety, basically, and that's what they want. They want more power over how the voting system works in Hong Kong. And so I'll go more in detail with how the news has been portraying this situation, more specifically on the left side, where Vox and CNN, I took these articles and quoted them as they are very interesting to me, because while the right side is more aggressive towards the abuse of the political the protesters, and how they portray the protesters as very weak and very the victims, basically, and how the Chinese government is corrupt and terrible. Left, the Vox and CNN in particular, they, from their quotes, it's they are neither on the Chinese government side, nor are they on the Hong Kong Hong Kong people side. And it's not like they have no bias, though. There is a bias. It's just very strange, because they are standing on neither sides in the the choice of wording they use and the photos that they have decided on using, such as this photo here, which you can't see the caption, but basically this is a girl who is holding a picture of this lady with a bandage, and that lady in the bandage is basically an incident that occurred where she was a volunteer medic, because many people were getting hurt during the protest, but she was a volunteer in helping people, basically a first aid person. And she was shot in the eye with a rubber bullet and by the police, and she became a symbol of police brutality in the protests. And yeah, so some quotes include Beijing is already taking steps to arrest pro-democratic activists and objecting the booksellers from UK, therefore supposedly cementing a smooth transition in 2047. And yeah, basically they're on neither side, specifically in these two quotes. While on one side, they're talking about how mobs are violently attacking, and on the other side, they're also talking about how protesters are being extremely aggressive and vandalizing. So they're showing both sides, but it's like very strange to me. On the American conservative side, on the right side, there is. When I read it, it was very, very interesting because their wording is amusing, but like not in a good way. So this I took some 3 really prominent pieces in the article, and overall the article states many things about factual things that are occurring, such as the police brutality that is occurring, but also how the protesters themselves are not being the most civil or law abiding. But some key terms includes the last one where they're like a nightmare 30 years later the world can see it, Tiananmen Square Part 2. And I was just very amazed by their choice of comparing the Tiananmen Square Part 2 as equivalent to what's occurring in Hong Kong, and they also use specific really negative wording such as anarchy, threats, and it's just they're trying to portray the Chinese government as a really corrupt and terrible governing system, and it's definitely a bias. Not saying it's a good bias or a bad bias, but there is a bias, and it's very, very evident in their choice of wording and the photos used. Yeah. And so I also found some articles from mainland China, and these are articles that they're originally in Chinese, but I translated them. And so you can see very interesting that while they're not from the left side, the left side's way of portraying the Hong Kong protest, they were neither on the right side either, because that's basically like slapping your own face, kind of, because that's, yeah. So mainland China, they portrayed it as completely different. And they use very specific words to, in ways that they're basically rejecting one of the five demands of the Hong Kong protesters, specifically the one where they ask of not being named as rioters. And it is seen in their wording, their choice of wording, and particularly in this case where there was a situation where they tried to flip it around of rather than the police being brutal and really aggressive to the people, it's the other way around. And to get a better picture of the whole situation is that while there is the police and there is the protesters, there are also many, a whole lot of reporters. And they are, technically speaking, if you have the certification or the card saying that you are a reporter, you are basically protected, kind of. So you're on either side, so you shouldn't be you shouldn't be hurt in any way or arrested. So in this picture, they particularly show how the reporters are cornering and creating this image where it's the police are being super geared up to be aggressive, and how the article is basically talking about how this is definitely not the case, as the reporters or supposed reporters, known as reporters, are surrounding the police, and no one is filming the rioters. And it's basically showing how reporters, even them, they are biased, and they are making an image of how the police are doing, attacking innocent civilians, and they're saying that it's definitely not the case. So, which is interesting, because You wouldn't see that in northern Western media. Yeah, so basically, as I go back, more evidence directly taken from a Chinese article, use of words such as rioters, radical demonstrators, illegal demonstrations, and quickly dispersing the demonstrator before they assemble, which is interesting because they never specify on how they disperse them, and yeah, interesting. But yeah, these are my sources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone want to say something?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
Was Fox News included as part of the left or the right for like the sources you put?
It's Vox, not Fox, right?
Oh, Vox. Okay, I was so confused about that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I thought I heard the same thing, and then I saw.
Sorry.
So is this stuff still happening?
Well, it hasn't ended yet. It's still an ongoing issue. It's just after, because it's like the coronavirus, there are some, let's just say like pauses because nobody really wants to, get the virus, and they're trying to maintain social distancing. And you can't really do that when you're protesting. So.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of disappeared out of the news when it was on there every day, wasn't it? But yeah, I mean, the news that we get from China is often difficult because of the censorship and control, and a lot of the times what we see has to be, if you will, in the truth world, has to be snuck out, if you will, right? Because of the way that the system works. Yeah. Well, another, is it human rights? What's the real issue here? What's the real issue? Anyone else? Okay. Well, excuse me. Let's continue with what we were talking about yesterday. So we left off on this slide. Nations and states, basically homogeneous and heterogeneous states, nation states, binational states, for example, Canada, originally, right? We had England and France claiming their ways, and then we had some diplomacy, if you will, battles here and there. Multi-state nations, multinational states like Soviet Union, etc. So what is Canada? Is it a homogeneous or a heterogeneous state?
Hetero.
How so?
Well, there are many different cultures in Canada.
So it's definitely multicultural. It looks very different today than it did 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago, 90+% of the population was of British descent, and so forth, right? Now, are we one nation or are we binational? Edwin. What about Edwin? Edwin's Wi-Fi keeps dying. Okay, it happens. We haven't had much success. I cried? About what? His Wi-Fi. Oh yeah, I know, it is tough. It is tough to deal with, Edwin. We're all there for you, buddy. All right. Society. What is society? Well, in society, those of you that are studying philosophy will know that it needs rules, but not just in philosophy. I guess in philosophy you talk about how those rules are created, what rules we need. But the idea is that once you have a certain amount of people living together, in the Sapiens book, when I reference that, I should really talk about who the author is, Harari. In Harari's Sapiens book, he argues that I believe the magic number is 150. I can't remember how many. Has anybody read the book? Sapiens? You did?
Yeah.
Okay. So in Sapiens, he argues that when people are you read 5 pages of it. Okay, that's good. It's a good start. People living together in communities. Once it reaches 100, I think it's 150, but please correct me if I'm wrong. People living together, and he even references what was it, Warcraft or something. It seems to be like the magic number underneath. No real government is needed. People are able to live harmoniously in their little group. But as soon as we have more than that, conflicts are inevitable. People pursue their self-interests. Society is created and so forth. And so we need rules. And that's why, for thousands of years, philosophers, political scientists, etc., have been trying to figure out what the best way to govern people is, because we need to be ruled. We need to have laws, rules. And, the government is needed. And I'm just arguing what many philosophers say, to arbitrate the machinery, if you will. Excuse me. Because once we make it past that many people, we almost lose our humanity in terms of, helping each other, right? And so we need politics to help. Hey, Edwin, help us from killing each other, basically. I think it's Plato who said that the reason we need rules and laws is if we didn't, we'd kill each other. Sounds drastic, but this is what he was talking about. So, in order for us to have a good society, we need good people, and good people have to have a good society. Governments that exist need to have the ability to have, the ability to carry out decisions. How do they do this? Through power, through force or coercion or persuasion or authority. And, we see a mix of those things. Look at the issue that we were just talking about today, or not we, but the presenter. Who presented again? I can't remember your name. Natalie, thank you. Are they using force, persuasion, their authority, coercion? It's arguable that a little bit of everything leaning towards force, maybe? I don't know. Depends on which side you look at, what information you're gathering. I have a old school friend who, grew up here in Canada, and he lives in China right now, in Hong Kong. And according to him, nothing was really happening on the streets. And it was, according to him, he's writing in China, so who knows what's going on. But those protests and the way that it was portrayed in the media here was, blown out of proportion, exaggerated. The general consensus of people is not the way that the West has portrayed it. And the reason the West is portraying it that way is obviously it's a chance to, discredit the political system of China. Especially the United States has a long history of the Red Scare, right? We've had 2 major historical Red Scare incidents, but especially in the United States, and we talked about this yesterday, they're very, very, very scared of anything to do with social, anything to do with left-leaning society, right? And so, although there's no war, there's still a war of ideas, especially fundamentals between China and the United States. And it boils down to, politics, right? So when we have power alone, it tends to lead to its own negation. Basically, if the society does not like the decisions, there's revolt. But there must be legitimacy to the government, right? Acceptance of leaders, legal acceptance, right? The laws that we have and our rights. And people tend to follow leaders. I mean, it's happening to an extreme right now in the United States. The leaders of Trump, or followers of Trump, right? This morning on the radio when I was driving, and yeah, I listen to the radio, not talk radio, but they always have news and funny things. I was listening to 88.1, and they they're like, let's call American, like they called random places in America. And they asked, who are you going to vote for? And, people pick up the phone or whatever store, and they're like, yeah, we're calling from Canada. We're wondering who you're going to vote for. And some people were like, either not saying who they're going to vote for. One guy was like, I'm not voting for anybody. But the other people were like, oh, I'm going to vote for Biden. Saying it really lethargically, nonchalantly. And one guy even admitted, he's a lesser of two evils. That's what he was saying. But when you listen to the people that are voting for Trump, yeah, I'm going to vote for Trump. Yeah, whoa. And this followership is, it's created. And we've seen it in history before, where there's almost, a mismatch of the idea that we have a savior. Some people call Trump a savior. It's, he's no longer human. When really in democracy, the idea is everyday people represent the other everyday people. And it's not always the case, right? We put them on, not we, but many people put politicians on pedestals. And it's an interesting phenomenon because it's, many philosophers argue that's not what we should be doing. They're working for us, theoretically, right? So a government has to be legitimate in order for the society not to protest. So in Hong Kong, China, there's a large feeling, according to the many news outlets, that the government and what they're doing is not legitimate in terms of, how they go about things, the rules, etc. And the people want a different system, if you will, right? And then we'll talk about sovereignty later, right? Modern states typically created as, colonies, if you will, if you take America, Canada as an example, and then getting their own autonomy, right? So how does a society's view of minorities help and hinder those minorities? Well, this is a great example because right now, a lot of the things that we've seen in the news revolve around the BLM movement or the Black Lives Movement or the counter movement, whatever you want to call it, amongst others, the Blue Lives Movement or the All Lives Matter movement. And again, fits into the category of the different worldviews that people have, right? So if we have immigration policies, we look at, often seen as a pro thing, when they're pro, and the West gets settled. Multiculturalism as a program. Canadian heritage is based on, and today we have an official multicultural stance, and that's a great thing, because, well, you can decide why that's a great thing. But of course, there are many people, unfortunately, who don't believe in that at all. Even in Canada, we see, we so often see America as being the racist country and Canada being multicultural. But Canada has a lot of racism, systemic. We're doing a good job of, taking out the systemic racism. Unfortunately, there still exists. And then, of course, there are everyday people who are racist, etc. Cons of the minority racial profiling. Toronto Police Services in 2000s still exists today, although the American BLM movement seems to be overshadowing what's happening in Canada. But, the numbers and percentages of non-white criminals is a lot higher than statistics should be showing. And often, and it's come to a head now. Of course, in the Second World War and before that in Germany, with the restriction of rights for the Jewish people and the Roma and anybody who wasn't a part of their race, if you will. So, these are both talking about, the view on society, right? So let's take a look at these. We can talk about these. Obviously, we're not going to be pairing off right now, but whose governments tend to work together? What factors make them so willing to cooperate with one another? Even with your, obviously we all have limited knowledge on the inner workings of international politics and foreign relations, but we know that Canada, United States are friends. The United States and the United Kingdom are more or less allies. Are they friends? Well, of course we have our histories, but the Soviet Union, Cuba, Norway, Sweden, Finland. How, from what the example Canada, United States, the reason we work so well together and cooperate is similar culture, similar social and economic values, similar people. What about the United States and United Kingdom? Anyone? Why do you think they, I would add history, similar culture, sure. I mean, the Americans helped a great deal in the wars. But if you go back 250 years, the Americans fought the British for independence, right? Yeah, historically, lots of trade relations, good. And we have a shared history, America was basically a British colony. So the people, share the same history. What about Soviet Union and Cuba? Now, of course, Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but Cuba sure does. Well, we could start with the idea that they're both communists, common enemy during Cold War. Sure, they were common enemy, communism. You could even maybe add China into that list. History, right? So again, similar culture, I don't know. Definitely not. But similar economic values, similar politics. History of because we're on the same side, let's help each other type of deal. What about Norway, Sweden, and Finland?
They're all geographically near one another.
Sure, they're right next to each other. Well, interesting fun fact, Finland is not part of Scandinavia. Yeah, but it is assumed that they are. The other country that's part of Scandinavia is Denmark. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Even though they're all right next to each other, and Finland is definitely ask a Finnish person and they will say absolutely not. Similar economic systems, similar values. You know, geography plays a role in that maybe. And I don't mean because they're next to each other. I mean because they're northern situated off the coast, you know, in similar history. Yeah, I said that. Now, religion. We often talk about separation of church and state, you know, and we're supposed to have a separation, but if you really look at the way that certain countries work, it's not usually like that. There's always an influence, if it's historically or, you know, officially. For example, in Canada, we have a separation of church and state. But is there anything about any religion that's a part of the system? And I don't even mean the Catholic school board, because we already talked about that. I mean anything to do with anything. Can anybody think of anything? How about Christmas? Christmas is officially a holiday on the 25th. And then, of course, Boxing Day the next day.
Easter is an official holiday too, right?
Good Friday is, and then Easter Monday for banks and schools, but private sector, I think, is usually open. But yeah, that's a part of it too. Yeah. Right?
God is mentioned in the national anthem.
Yep, God is mentioned in the national anthem. Even though we removed our sons, the line, nobody wanted or even touched the God part.
God is mentioned in the charter.
God is mentioned in the charter, right? You know, and that being said, in public schools, you're not allowed to have Christmas concerts anymore, right? So what does that mean? Is it hypocritical, or is it just we're still progressing? What's happening? Excuse me.
I think it's too hard to like completely remove like quote unquote secular Christianity from our culture, because that's like what it's based on.
Okay, so secular Christianity, that's a good point. Christmas, you know,
Sir,
to
I
a lesser
also,
extent. What?
Oh, sorry, nothing.
Just
I just wanted to say that, like, you know, like for a country to be secular, we also need to be careful of, like, you know, like how in Quebec you can't have any religious signs. If it's like that, then that's, I think, too far.
Okay.
You know, people should be
Right.
allowed to.
So the idea that in Quebec and then started in France, you know, France has a very long history of being very secular. The reason why it is you're not allowed to have any type of religious paraphernalia visible in public places, in terms of, I mean, not public places, in like, you know, schools or government offices, etc., is because they want it to be equal, right? What are the three colors of the French flag stand for? Does anybody know?
Liberté, égalité, and fraternité, right?
Right. So if everybody is equal, nobody has any distinguishing religious features. Now, unfortunately, or just matter of factly, certain people, critics, if you will, have viewed that the elimination of this, you know, religious, you know, artifact, if you will, law, is actually very racist against or xenophobic against Muslims, specifically because there's a percentage of Muslim women who wear head covering. And, you know, most, if you look at Christianity, if somebody wears a cross, it's easily tucked under their shirt. So that's a critical analysis. But if you ask the lawmakers, they will flat out deny that, because the idea is that it's not about pinpointing one particular religion. It's simply all religions. And just because you as a Muslim have something that is so much more obvious than a Christian, you can't automatically say that they're being racist against you, right? But it's created a huge debate.
Sir,
because-
I think
Yeah.
it should be like the government that doesn't affiliate with a religion and not the individuals who work for it.
But that's hand in hand. If you work for the government, you are part of the government.
Yeah, but like you
You're
know
part
how,
of the machine.
yeah,
right?
True.
I'm not telling you anything that's my opinion. Remember that. I'm just telling you what people, the different sides believe, right? And, you know, in France, they've had this law in a much stricter manner to the point where there are many girls, young girls, who don't go to school, Muslim girls, because they can only go to school if they remove the hijab. You know, so I don't know if anybody's chosen that topic in the news, but it's an ongoing one. Of course, you know, things get overshadowed in terms of what's being reported every day, but that's a very important issue, especially because it exists in Quebec too. Now, going back to the idea, Sabrina was talking about secular Christianity and so forth. I think there's a difference between, you know, countries have holidays, and the history of what those holidays often is insignificant to the current situation of that holiday. Some argue. Remember, some argue. So, for instance, having a day off, a number of days off in a year from work, is important to people. You know, they don't have to be Christian to appreciate a day off of work, where culturally people get together as a family and have dinner. And I'm talking about, you know, let's say Christmas. You see what I'm talking about? So, you know, there's a lot of people who will never say, well, let's not eliminate the Christmas holiday, even though they're not Christian, because it's Christian. No, they'll say, let's keep it because it's you know, Canada only has X amount of holidays, or even the word holiday. Where do you think it comes from? Holy day, right? Historically. So that's, you know, the secular Christianity thing where people, you know, they follow these holidays per year, but they're not really a part of the religion, or if they are Christian, they're not following. But what about the idea that we have the word God in the national anthem? That's a totally different topic. Right?
I mean, it's just most people, they believe in a God. It doesn't like specifically say what God. So,
Do they though, Dina?
hmm?
Do they though?
I don't know. I think it's just more about atheists and.
See, I think that you know, not a very large percentage of people follow the historical idea of what, you know, and the word God in the national anthem obviously historically does not mean any God, any religion's God, right?
Yeah.
Maybe today that is how it is explained because officially we are a multicultural society. But again, it's still there, and there are many religions that, or secular people, atheist, agnostic, secular, humanists, what have you, that aren't too happy with that there. But then again, there's also people like, who really cares, right?
Yeah.
But Eastern religion and politics, Western religion and politics, you know, influence and historically have, right? And that's basically what we're talking about here. So, you know, Hinduism, one of the biggest religions in the world, the oldest major world religion, you know, isn't even really historically religion. It comes from, you know, the people who lived around the Indus Valley, their culture, their world. You know, the idea of it being an organized religion comes much later in their history. But much of the history of India, politically, you know, very, very specifically or loosely is tied to that religion. Even things like the caste system, Um, India has banned the caste system politically, yet, many argue it still exists, right? Mahatma Gandhi, very, very important historical figure, political figure, used the doctrine of ahimsa, which is a Hindu doctrine, also used in Buddhism, etc., of nonviolence, for getting protest, etc. So there is religion rooted in things, right? Confucius, that's not so much religion as or philosophical philosophy or doctrine, but the idea is right living. So when we talk about secular humanists, in grade 11 you might have world religions, you might have talked about secular humanism as a religion, if you will, but it's a non-religion, obviously. But it just basically, for those of you who don't know what that means, it's a person who doesn't, they can be an atheist or an agnostic, regardless, but they don't follow the set doctrines of a religion, but they understand that humans have a code to do the right thing, and they believe that you don't learn and have to do the right thing because your religion tells you these are the 10 commandments, right? But all these things existed in society, and you talk about China. Mao Zedong outlawed religion, but the history and the people, it exists, and lessons exist even today, right? Of course, Buddhism, very, very important in countries like Tibet and many Asian countries. Judaism, the Israel is a Jewish country based on the history. Hey, interesting side note. So they did a big study of your generation and the millennials. I guess the millennials are the generation before you. And the scholars were surprised at how little people in your age group know about the Holocaust. Anyone have anything to say about that?
I mean, sir, we learn it in school. I don't know why. Maybe in America they
Was
don't.
the only place you ever learned it in grade 10 history?
No, we learned it. I personally didn't know it before I came to Canada, but like I remember we learned it in grade 8 too.
I think I don't think it was actually it was taught very much, but just through like personal research on the topic.
Right.
I think we did learn it a little bit, but is it kind of just like are they talking about the Holocaust and knowing particular details, or the Holocaust in general? Like, do people just not know that happened?
Well, I think a lot of people maybe have, don't really know what it is. Might have heard the word, but might have, know it's about something about Nazis, but don't really know what it is, right?
So
really.
Yeah, I saw some interviews. They were asking people like who's Hitler and what's Holocaust, and like a lot of them didn't know. And they weren't necessarily all like our age. There were millennials too.
Yeah.
I think that people like our generation should know it, because I know a lot of elementary schools, part of the curriculum is reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And then for like social studies, I think we do a huge unit on it. So I think that's
elementary school. In elementary school? Jeez, that's such a sad story. Way to.
In our grade 7 class, we spent like half a semester studying the Holocaust, and it was based off the book.
Interesting. Well, that's good. I think Canada is different than America too. Because, one of the biggest lessons of history and reasons why we study history is so we don't repeat it We learn lessons from the past. And, I mean, it's almost become a cliche now after 4 years of Donald Trump about the similarities between what he has done and tried to do and what Hitler did. Right?
I don't think it's fair to like blame all this on Donald Trump because like the ICE camps were started during the Obama administration. Like America as a system, it's not just one guy making it bad. It's been bad from the beginning.
Well, that's why I said it's become a cliche with Trump. But you're right. The American system is, historically very racist. I mean, I don't even think that's a very controversial statement. It might be. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but there's a reason why we've seen the BLM protests, and that are happening. It's nothing new, right? Nothing new by any means. We've had civil rights movements for a very long time, right? Started with women's rights, and then eventually turned into black rights, and then the LGBT community rights, and now it's seemingly, according to the news, it's all back to the black rights, but that's all civil rights, equal rights, just like the presenter the other day, who was that? Sada, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also just in regards to Trump, like although the system of America and especially regarding ICE has been extremely terrible and hasn't had a very good foundation and isn't run properly whatsoever, it was the Trump administration that forwarded the family separation policy through ICE, which is where you saw the outcry and the outrage for children being separated from their families, put in these cages, and etc. That's why, you saw everyone explaining this outcry and the kind of the parallel between Hitler.
Sir, it's also just that it's not just that, like, they banned, like, kids that have, are pregnant there, they can't even have abortions. They just deny it.
In regards to the immigration policy and the camps, it is safe to say that you can blame Trump for a lot of the issues going on right now. One, because he's the president. Although it was around with Obama, it was nowhere like it was today due to the policies that Trump has implemented. Right?
Yeah. Well, listen, again, maybe somebody can take this topic as their news topic because, again, the media is able to create a narrative. So it's easy for them, because they know what they're doing, because that's the media, create a sort of, depending on which side you talk about, a blame game, a situation where they portray this or that, certain people in certain lights, the same people that portray Trump as the savior, as the next Messiah, portray Obama as the devil, and vice versa. Other other organizations do the exact opposite. And nobody's squeaky clean. Has anybody here watched the movie by Moore called Fahrenheit 11/9?
I've watched a little bit, but not the full movie.
So there's a part in it about the Flint water crisis. And it was on the news. It still exists, where basically, the water is not drinkable, let's just say. And the reasons for it. It was drinkable once, no longer drinkable. And Obama was in power at that time. And so, but again, the system is not as black and white as that. Because again, America is 50 different states. and the federal government has a lot less power over individual states than, we learned about that in the first week of this class. Well, this is only the second week, but it's easy to blame, right? The whole immigration and illegal immigrant thing in America is a very old narrative. It's been around for a very long time. And, it's a debate because the laws are created and it has to do a lot with the state versus federal laws, are very, interpretable. And when it comes to who can live and work in the States as an official resident, citizen, or illegal, if you will. Canada has very different laws in terms of immigration and refugee status, right? I remember teaching a student about 10 years ago whose family escaped, the mother and the two sons, across the border from, I believe they're from Nicaragua, all the way up through the States and then into Canada, and applied for refugee status. While their application was being looked at, which was like a year or two, they could go to school, and then the Canadian government denied their application and sent them home. Whereas in the United States, the system has created this abundance of people going into the country, being able to work and never getting official papers. And that debate has caused a lot of issues because, for whatever reason, some people believe that they're taking jobs away from residents. Other people argue that those jobs are ones that residents and citizens don't want. Right? So it is a great topic for anybody to choose. For our weekly or daily news article thing. So let's keep going. Catholicism, Christianity itself is the biggest religion in the world, all the offshoots included, and very influential in the West. Very influential. So a lot of our laws are based on that. Now, of course, Islam is a huge one too, because the Sharia law. There are Islamic countries that follow to the T, and the laws stated by the interpretations of Islamic readings, text, and then of course there are countries with predominantly Islamic people that are more secular. But again, it's how it is, right? Protestantism, the United States was built upon Protestantism. The Mayflower, those people were basically, left England because they were persecuted for their beliefs, and then brought their beliefs to the United States. Hence why historically the United States is much more Protestant than Catholic. Right? So what is it, 1:30? Why don't we take a 10-minute break, go stretch your legs, do what you need to do. Okay?
Okay, see you soon.
Okay.